Well, if you're a defender of the faith, it's important always to be able to become a sharper, more effective defender of the faith and be able to share your faith with confidence and clarity and charity. And help us do that, we have our good friend Pat Flynn with us. As you know, Pat is a best-selling author, philosopher, fitness coach. He's also a musician and an entrepreneur. You could check out all his great stuff at chroniclesofstrength.com. And by the way, he has a fantastic YouTube channel. If you haven't checked it out, you need to, especially if you love philosophy. It's called Philosophy for the People. So if you maybe you once dabbled in philosophy and would like to kind of blow the dust off your neurons, or maybe you're not familiar with philosophy and would like to learn a little bit about the classics, check that out. It's a great channel, Philosophy for the People. And while you're there, subscribe, like, hit the thumbs up, leave comments, do all that stuff too. So Pat Flynn, welcome to Hands On Apologetics.
Good to be here, Gary. It's always too long between our chats. Since
you're kind of new to the crazy world of defending your faith in an irrational world, there's always new things that are out there and new ways to improve. So that might actually be better than being a seasoned veteran, because things get a little fuzzy. And of course, the world changes so quickly. Like the opponents I used to face back in the day, it's a lot different than the opponents probably you face on a daily basis.
Yeah, and even in the past couple of years, I've seen the the apologetic landscape, if you will, shift in interesting and in new ways. So you always have to be ready. You always have to be willing to adapt to the situation, of course. An apologist has to be, as we'll talk about, a pretty good generalist, I think, actually.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. Yeah. Generalism. What is generalism?
Yeah. Well, actually, you know what? It was a point a little bit down on my list of the points I wanted to share, but I might as well just start with this one, right? A generalist, in my mind, is somebody who's, good to great or at least fairly competent at a lot of different things, right? You're kind of ready for, able to handle almost anything. And I think when it comes to apologetics, and this is 2 points, I think you need to be a specialist and a generalist. And what I mean is this. I think if you want to do apologetics and really do it well, make a difference, you do need to focus in on some particular issue, and you need to grind it to an absolute intellectual pulp. You need to just read everything on it that you can, deal with all the objections, and just come, even for yourself, to that point of true intellectual satisfaction. And that is really hard work, chasing an issue to the end of the proverbial rainbow. It takes years and years, if you're being honest. You'll struggle, you'll sweat. But few things in life are, I think, as satisfying as really doing that with something. Now, in apologetics, there's lots of areas where you could do that. I've wanted to kind of focus on obscure metaphysical issues, mostly arguments for the existence of God. That's kind of where I've spent a lot of my time. But I think it's important that if you're going to do apologetics, you have that area. Gary, I remember before I even met you, people kind of called you the Deutero guy. You were the Deutero guy, right?
Right, yeah.
You got your area that you focus on, like, this is the guy. And I think it's important that people try to be the guy or the gal on at least one particular issue, not only for your own enrichment and development, but also that you can be that asset to the church. You can be that person that when this issue comes up, and somebody needs to bring in the expert, you can be there to do it. I think that's really important. However, I think you also, as an apologist, need to be a generalist, because that issue isn't the only issue, right?
Right.
And the environment's always changing. People are always bringing up different issues. How often in everyday conversation are people really picking at belief in the existence of God? The truth is it's a minority of instances where my specialization is super relevant. Really, it's often issues related to the authority of the church or the reliability of the Gospels, or is there enough historical data to really support the core claims of Christianity in general. So I've always felt that even though I'm not specialist in those areas, I do need to have at least a general competence to give a pretty good, quick and ready apologetic to people who are interested in hearing those things. I don't want to just kind of be like, caught with nothing to say because I'd only, focused on this one area. So I guess my first point is 2 points. Is I think if you want to do apologetics well, you need to be a specialist and a generalist. You need to be able to handle the sort of whole collection of broad issues. And apologetics, there's really three branches, God, Christ, and church, right? Does God exist? Is Jesus God? And did Christ found the Catholic Church? Have a good foundation in those areas to be able to give an apology for all of them, but then find some particular issue, preferably one that really interests you so you're motivated in it, to really just drive at it and grind at it and try and reach that point of not just satisfaction for yourself, but being able to present something and bring something to other Catholics that will help them in their apologetic efforts as well. So there's a start.
Yeah. Well, hey, and it's great because if you on the specific issue that you pick out, whatever is on your heart, right? Like with me, it's deuterocanon. With you, theistic apologetics, metaphysics. That's your wheelhouse. So if you're ever in the discussion and you need to bring the discussion to an area of competence, you can always move it in that direction, right? And in terms of also having a general knowledge, you can use that general knowledge to improve your overall apologetics. Like I think Trent Horn does a fantastic job. You do as well, where like you'll take some of the things that you learned in metaphysics, and then you'll use it to show that it's let's say coherent to believe in the incarnation. Or something like that, or Trent Horn will use like arguing with atheists. Sometimes Protestant arguments kind of mimic atheist arguments. You know what I mean? So you can use that to build a synergism where your apologetics are like really, really ripped, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. I think being a generalist encourages creativity and helps you to form, connections that you wouldn't otherwise form if you're just hyper focused on one area all the time. I think that's definitely true. So that's my first point. Yeah, be a specialist, and my second point is be a generalist. Be both when it comes to apologetics, right?
Right.
This next one is, this next one is really important. I've mentioned it before, maybe even on your show a while ago, and that's understanding the matter-manner distinction. And the matter-manner distinction is this. There's what you say, and then there's how you say it. And boy, is this an important lesson to keep in mind? It really relates to the old saying that, nobody wants to be around you if you're a jerk, even if you're right, right? And at the end of the day, as apologists, we're not trying to lose arguments, definitely, right? We do want to win arguments, but fundamentally, we're trying to save souls. The goal of the apologist is to bring souls to Christ, to bring people into the church, right? It's not just to win arguments and prove that people are wrong. The arguments are a tool. They're a tool of service where we're trying to invite people to seriously consider the Catholic Christian faith and, probably make some really significant changes in their lives, right? So there's what you say, which is important. That's why we do the study. We try to understand the material. We try to be careful. We try to be correct, but then there's how we say it. How do we present ourselves, right? How are we interacting with other people online, in person? Are we being bullies? Are we constantly insulting people? If so, that's not only, I think, imprudent and ineffective, it doesn't align with what Scripture commands of us, right? I always like the way you introduce your show. We present it with clarity and charity. Clarity and charity. So this is, and of course, I say this is an important reminder because I always have to come back to it myself. Apologetics is often a dirty business. We're often, dealing with people who are a little hot, little agitated, not always saying the nicest things to us or in general. So it's easy to lose your patience, and it takes a lot of practice. We all mess up from time to time, but it's something that I always come back to, making sure that I understand the matter-manner distinction. It's not just what you say, but how you say it.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Now, because you might have right information, but if you present it wrongly, it could actually drive people further away. And if you have the wrong information, it doesn't matter how well you present it, it's just not going to fly.
Yeah. And, sometimes it's just little simple things of how you enter into conversations, instead of saying, here's a simple, just practical tip, right? As many people know, I used to be a naturalist and I engage a lot with other naturalists and atheists. And I found that just instead of like attacking somebody, so you say, oh, no, you're wrong. And here's arguments to show you're wrong. it often is just so much more effective and helpful if you just come from sharing your own story. It's like, hey, that's an interesting thought. I thought very similar at certain times, and then I considered this line of argument, and it got me thinking in a new direction. What do you think of it, right? And then that just reframes and repositions everything, because now you're kind of like actually in a conversation and being maybe productive with one another rather than being combative. So it's like little things like that. Honestly, like kind of like basic social awareness at the end of the day, right? To make a huge difference of like if you don't have to get people to, get on the defensive right away, then don't do it, And one of the easiest strategies for that is instead of attacking, sharing things, especially if you have stories of where you changed your mind, saying, hey, yeah, this is, I don't think you're crazy for believing this, probably not. In fact, I believe something similar. Then here's some stuff that sort of changed my mind. What do you think of it? Right. And that's just such a better way to try and start off these types of conversations.
Yeah, that's why I think converts sometimes make very good apologists, in that they can always tie their own story into the opposition's position, right? They can always say, when I was a Protestant fundamentalist, I believed the same thing, and go through it. And that's kind of engaging because you learn something about the person, right? And you could show that you have sympathy for what they hold, and then you can share your insights. So it isn't like you're wrong and this is why. It's like, what really persuaded me on this is X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, and not only that, but I've had people say to me, well, Pat, I'm not a former atheist, so how can I do that? Well, you can learn other people's stories. I do it all the time. I have stories of people I was never a Protestant, but I have many friends who have good stories that were Protestants, and, great people. And they believe this, and then here's what they encountered, and here's why it caused them to start thinking differently. Just share someone else's story. That tends to be just as effective often.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's really important, wrapping things up in a personal story so it's not attacking people. It's a very incarnational way of dialoguing, because we're not Gnostics, right? We're not just trying to put information in people's heads and that saves them, Right. It's got to take on flesh, and that takes a lot of the heat out of the conversation, usually.
Yes, focusing on light, not heat. I think that's the key. That's a great point, Gary. And related to that, I guess it would be next point. I know we said 5, but it might be more than 5 here. I was sort of jotting down ideas. I'm like, oh wow, there's actually a lot here. Field manual of sorts. Understanding your target too, and there's different contexts, especially now with the online world, and depending on what the context is and what your target is, that the manner and how you present it might be different. So, say you're actually in a debate, that's a unique context. And the truth is when you're in a debate, the target isn't usually your debate opponent. Generally, you're not trying to change their mind. If you do, great. That's a bonus. The target is the audience, and specifically those people in the audience that are sort of on the fence or weakly leaning in one direction or another, right? And so the goal of the debate is to win, right? So in that sense, you might be more direct. You're trying to get your points out. You're trying to rebut quickly. You're trying to be efficient. Of course, you're not trying to be a jerk. You're still trying to, clarity and charity. And somebody like William Lane Craig is a good model here. I don't think anybody denies that, despite theological differences. He's a good model of how to handle yourself in a debate. Not going after your debate opponent, but the audience, right? However, most of us are not in debates like that most of the time. In other instances, more realistic everyday life instances, the person we're talking with is the person whose mind we're trying to change. So it's not all about just trying to, throw all of our points out, smash all of their questions or rebuttals as quickly as possible, because now they're the ones we're trying to work with, right? So now we should be more patient, right? And here's the other thing about being an apologist. Patience is key in so many different ways. People almost never change their mind on the spot. Conversations should be had over time. You should be willing to make investments in people, get a conversation started, and be willing to just let it go on for a while and revisit it over time. I mean, this is how life works. Listen twice as much as you speak, the old grandfather piece of advice, right? You have 2 ears, 1 mouth. Listen twice as much as you speak. Ask questions. Find common ground. There is a time, namely debates, where, yes, you want to get your points across quick, hard, and fast, but other times, and again, kind of simple practical things, especially in the world of social media, We're often wanting to present points where a lot of people are looking, and we might do so in a way that is actually not the most effective way of engaging with or changing somebody's mind directly. And it could be as simple as, instead of making the point publicly, send a private note or an email or something like that. Because again, when things are public, people act weird, right? They just do. There's always everyone feels like they have to put on a show. But I found when I correspond with people privately, that whole game, that whole show isn't there, and you can just have a much more direct and real conversation with people. And I find it's a subtle thing, but it's a lesson I've sort of learned throughout the years, that hey, if I really want to engage with this person, maybe I don't have to go, spam their Facebook wall of why this post they put up is wrong. Send them an email, send them a message, and just sort of let the conversation happen without them feeling like there's a million eyeballs looking in. And that's little things like that. Understanding your target, I think, make a big difference. Gary, I'm sure you have a lot to say on that yourself.
Yeah, no, that's a great advice. Yeah, so, well, actually, you have two ideas there. One is you kind of need to calculate, is this going to be a one chance meeting between you and this person? If so, that's going to affect how you're going to approach them. Or is it somebody that you're going to see repeatedly, right? So you could have a longer game of just taking baby steps to it. That's an important assessment to make. And the other thing, too, is audience, right? Because is it going to be private or is there going to be an audience? And if there's going to be an audience, you kind of have to gear your apologetics so that, who knows, maybe you can influence somebody that's listening or watching. Where, like, I agree with you. I think the one-on-one private approach is optimal because, without the spotlights and stuff, it's a lot easier to admit that, well, I made a mistake, or I never thought of it that way, or, show some humility.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. The other thing is, with social media, almost everything is public these days. Yeah. And so, and you never know who's looking and watching, your Twitter feed or your Facebook, stuff like that. I still get messages all the time that surprise me of somebody who caught this thread and has I had no idea somebody like that was watching. So that's just something to always be aware of, again, and all the more reason to just be very attentive and prayerful in how you actually present yourself, because you really never know who's looking in on these types of conversations. Okay, my next point, I think this is a really important point, and probably a very common mistake I see among people who want to start getting into apologetics, and that is this: they just read apologetics. Yeah, big mistake. Can't do that, right? It's fine to read apologetics, and there's a lot you'll get from reading apologetics, especially if you read somebody who has a great manner of presentation and was persuasive to you. But the major problem of just reading apologetics is you won't be that good at apologetics. You'll kind of just be a parrot. And this is why so many people out there kind of new to apologetics, for better or worse, sound a lot like William Lane Craig, right? and God bless him. He's very good at apologetics. He's very good at debates. But if you want to be a good apologist, you need to have a formation that is much deeper and much wider than just apologetics. You need to read philosophy. You need to read theology. You need to read the primary text. You need to read the opposition directly. One of the major issues with sort of pop level apologetics books, and I know, Gary, you share this complaint, is they tend to be shallow, and oftentimes they can engage in straw manning. They can just get things wrong. So you're not going to have the best formation, the formation that you need to be an effective apologist, if you just read apologetics. Now, of course, there are many very good apologetics books out there. I'm currently working on editing one myself, right? Gary, you have some. I recommend yours all the time, but there's many bad ones as well. But the truth is, if you want to be a good apologist, you have to read wide and you have to read deep, and you have to get out of just kind of being in that apologetic circle, if that makes sense. Gary, I would love to hear some of your thoughts on this one. Yeah. Yeah, great points. I think it's a good place to start if you're totally new to this. Maybe you have a son or daughter that's leaving the faith or something, you need to get up to speed really quick. Apologetic books are the way to go, right? But, every apologist has their own blind spots, and not every apologist is, the best in all its areas.
And I think if you just confine yourself only to apologetics books, or especially if there's one particular apologist that you love to follow, you might be able to add something that's your own that maybe that particular person isn't exploiting or isn't using or just doesn't see the import of. There's a lot of, it kind of stunts personal development in a way. It's a lot better, like you said, to get to the sources and get a grasp of, the big picture.
Yeah. And I think the people who are the best apologists are those who aren't just doing apologetics, right? They're specialists in other areas, and then they do their best to bring, their great knowledge, kind of more down to a popular level, right? They're not just doing popular level apologetics, right? And I think there's something to be learned from that. That relates to my next point, which is that you need to get some basic training before you decide to go, fight it out in the trenches, so to speak, right? And this was something I was talking with a friend of mine who has an associate. And they were talking about sort of, homeschooling or private schooling. And this guy told my friend that he just wants to send his kids out into the world as soon as possible so they learn how to deal with it. And me and my friend thought well, that's like a huge mistake. It's like sending somebody out to fight in the trenches without basic training, right? There's clearly right. Like the world's just going to consume those poor children. Like heaven help them, right? Like There's clearly a balance between shelter and formation and exposure, a prudent balance that needs to be struck. And this is how I think we should be forming our apologists, if you will, right? You need to spend time in basic training. What does that mean? Well, it means kind of like all the stuff we've been talking about. You need that solid formation. Yeah, start out with apologetics, but then you need to read wide and deep. You need to understand your faith. You need to get some formation in philosophy. You need to read all the greats, understand the great ideas. Like just try and get that really solid formation. And then, yes, you need to start exposing yourself to the wider conversations and debates and engaging with people who disagree with you and stuff like that. Because here's the deal. At the end of the day, even though you might be totally right, and if you're Catholic, I think you are right, critics are tough and smart, man. Gary, I'm sure Gary will happily agree, right? The opposition is not weak. They're not all idiots. And if you're not ready for that, you're going to look silly. You might be discouraged. And this is not to discourage people from getting into apologetics. It's important. We need you, but we need you to be well formed and not just kind of like rush out on the battlefield and get obliterated. right.
Yeah.
And there's this, and I've seen it happen, and it's not good. Now, I think I sort of had a bit of an advantage because, before I stepped into apologetics, I always had this sort of background in philosophy and engaging lots of ideas. And if philosophy teaches you anything, it's that, boy, even crazy ideas can be defended by smart people, right? So you got to be careful, right? Even the craziest things have smart opposition. So you better have, your bases covered, right, before you really start to engage, because otherwise you're going to get a licking. You don't want that. So how long does that basic training need to be? How much you need to read? Those are open questions, but you need to have that period of solid formation of basic training before you just start, going out into the wild west, if you will.
It's important to go kind of through basic training, right, before you start interacting with the world. When you start interacting with the world, like my way of thinking would be the first people you'd want to interact with would be people that that don't have a platform. They're not experts, right? And then once you feel comfortable with that, then maybe go to answering Facebook or whatever, people that are willing to put things on print. And then when you're really comfortable with that, then go to people with big platforms and interact with them. Would you agree with that, or is it better to just go and swing for the fences and hope that maybe you make a point that, one of these big anti-Catholic guys might be thrown for a loop?
Yeah, just go for the 7th degree black belt. Try and get them right in the rear naked choke right away, right? So like that. No, I think that's prudent, right? I mean, all this takes practice, right? Engaging with other people, dialoguing, debating. It's all, to keep using the martial arts analogy, it's all about hours on the mat, right? Or if you're a musician, it's hours, how much time you spend on the fretboard, right?
Right.
So yeah, I think it probably is prudent to just do a lot of it behind the scenes at first. And let's be honest, a lot of that is probably the most important work to do. Conversations, friends, family members, the kind of, here's a good one, everyone knows that sort of rebellious atheistic teenager at their local parish. See if you can sit down and talk with them and answer their objections, and over time, get the blog started, engage with other blogs, and then keep, if you want to keep going deeper and deeper, do it, keep working way up. But I think that is prudent, Gary. I think it start immediately locally. At the end of the day, I still think that's probably where you're going to make the biggest difference anyways for most people. And then as you kind of feel like you're building the skills and the chops and the confidence, just kind of progressive resistance, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because I think these big platform people, even if you do make a dent in their armor, they're not going to show it because that could hurt their numbers. So, they'll. And
not only that, but you'll probably get piled on too at some point, right?
That's true. Yeah.
That's the other nasty side of apologetics. Like, look, you better develop thick skin for this stuff, right? Not just of getting criticized, but people will say not nice things about you. And, sometimes you'll get, the mob will descend and stuff like that. So I think it does take a certain sort of personality, but it's also, like music, and the guitar, you got to build up calluses, right? You'll just build up that toughness over time through an intelligent, controlled exposure, I would say. Yeah.
Very good. Yeah. I wasn't sure what you would say on that because you never know. I mean, truth is truth. And, I doubt if James White would convert on the spot if someone put something in his chat thing, but you never know.
But, and there's no guarantee the most popular or the brightest either. Sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes you'll encounter somebody who's really, really smart, just randomly, and like, oh wow, you kind of know your chops. I didn't, right? And then online, somebody will have a huge following, but they're as shallow as it gets too. But in general, I think your advice is very good. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. So okay, so we covered a lot of ground. Any other tips?
Yeah, I think we hit at least the 5 main ones that I wanted to hit, but let me say something else about I guess the life of the apologist and managing expectations, what it's like, right? Well, we hit some of it. It's not always the most pleasant business, but it's important business, and certainly the least we can do. But look, at the end of the day, you need to make sure that this is not overtaking your own spiritual life, right? Apologetics can be very draining, very consuming. My friend John DeRosa is very good at reminding us of this. Stay close to the Lord. Stay close in prayer. Be patient, not just with other people, but with yourself. Why? Because there will always be new challenges that you didn't see or predict that you will have to wrestle with and struggle with. And some of those may take a lot of time to overcome. And what I've learned is that if you stick with it, you do stay close to God throughout and pray for wisdom and understanding, you will receive it. Maybe not when you want. God will let you wrestle and struggle with things for considerable time. I've been there. But you keep at it, and I think there's virtue to be had in that, that you can and will come by God's grace to that satisfaction that you're looking for. So you need patience, not with other people, but yourself. Expect for there always to be new questions and challenges that you'll have to wrestle with. It's a tiring game. Take naps, do some exercise, eat healthy. It's not for the weak of heart or fragile by nature. I mean, apologetics is inherently combative, right? So you just gotta be ready for that type of stuff. And not everybody needs to be, a guns ablazing apologist. Apologetics can often be done in a much more subtle, not full-time way, right? I think of my wife, Christine. She does apologetics, but nowhere near full-time. But she definitely, dips her toe in and has her subtle, important way of doing it. So I think everybody can do some sort of apologetics in their life. Not everybody needs to do it at the level that Gary Machuda is doing it. Very few people will be able to do that, but that's okay. So kind of figuring out, how far you want to go with it, but either way, making sure that you're still living that life of prayer, going to mass, of course, adoration, all that good stuff. That's going to keep you well grounded. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
absolutely. In fact, I know people that got into apologetics and it just ruined their spiritual life, because all they did was eat, drink, and sleep apologetics. And, arguing with people and they'll read the Bible not for spiritual nourishment, but to find, juicy proof text or something like that.
Yeah, I know. Don't do that. Right. Yeah.
Right. So you do. I mean, I guess balance is the name of the game, right? Because to be a formidable apologist, you need to be a formidable Christian.
Yeah. I'm into that. And, cyclicality is good. Gary, I think you're pretty similar to me in the sense I think when we get after something, we really like to go after it. And, love to work hard at projects, but very important that you kind of, ease off the gas every now and then, take a break, take a refresher, focus on something else for a little while, restore yourself, and then, you can cycle back in and hit it hard again. That's basic weight training advice too, right? Like you need those deload periods, right? Every now and then.
That's right.
So otherwise you're going to burn out. You're going to crash and burn, right? Yeah. And you don't want that. Absolutely not. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in fact, I found out that it's usually during those periods where, you just put something aside and leave it. When you come back fresh, often you'll have different insights and you'll say, oh, that one's not a good point, but this is a really great point. And, maybe I could approach it from a different angle. You need that refreshing perspective. And the only way to do that is just to back off and, play with the kids or grandkids or whatever and, put things aside every now and then.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I first heard that piece of advice, not in apologetics, years ago. I was reading actually Stephen King's book on writing. And somewhere in that book, he gives the advice that when you're done with your project, the first draft, put it in a drawer for 3 months. Just don't touch it for 3 months because you need to be able to step away and then come back again with that fresh perspective to really give it the enhancements, the editing that it needs. You need that distance, you need that space. And boy, that's so true in everything. Like after you've really just worked hard at that first draft, right, of whatever it is, your book, your academic article, your business, your podcast, I don't know, eruption on the electric guitar, whatever it is, right?
Right.
You need to step away from it for a while. One, because I think there's just like connections in your brain that just take time. That need to like be formed, right? But then also coming back with that fresh perspective where you can just see the things that you weren't able to see before. And if you don't give yourself that space, you're going to miss having that perspective and making something better, but you will burn out and you'll become jaded and deteriorated, and you don't want that. So you need to just, I would say, plan in advance to have those periods of deload, of stepping away, focusing on something else for a while, and coming back, after you feel a bit restored. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's true. And, the Catholic faith is beautiful because we have feast days and, all sorts of ways that we could take those little sabbaticals and kind of hit the refresh button and then return back, to whatever project we're doing. Great advice. Well, Pat, we have a few minutes left in the show. And as always, I love hearing about what you got on tap for Philosophy for the People and any other projects you're doing.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, Philosophy for the People, we've got some good stuff coming up. I have Dr. Joshua Sijuwadi, who's been doing a lot of really cool work. He himself is a Catholic convert, and he talk about specializations. He specializes in the Trinity and monotheism. So if you've been interested in issues, the general, puzzles that arise from Trinitarian theology, stay tuned. I will be having him on Thursday. So he's the most recent. My good friend, Dr. Gavin Kerr, who's been on the show with me before, Gary, he'll be on the week after. And we're going to talk about why he is going to argue that masculinity is not toxic, despite what culture might say. So a little bit different flavor coming from Gavin, who himself often focuses on metaphysical issues. He just gave a talk on that. So we're going to have him on the podcast to expand on that.
Now, will this be from a Thomist perspective?
It's from a virtue ethics perspective. So you'll get a heavy Thomist sauce served on top of this dish. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. So, and that's a great example of, becoming a generalist, right? Because it's like he's a great Thomist, but he's able to apply it in different fields and really enhance new ideas. And
Gavin's brilliant. Gavin's brilliant. He's a brilliant apologist. If you've ever seen him on my show or other shows, he's so quick on his feet because he's so well formed. Why? Because he's a professional philosopher. He's got his area of specialization, but he is an amazing generalist as well. That pretty much anything you throw at him, he is going to be able to handle it. Also into martial arts and playing guitar. So kind of a man that
wow.
After my own heart, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and he's also a teacher. I think teachers make really good apologists because the students are basically like little objectors. You really get hit with everything in the classroom.
Yeah. And there's a final tip. Like, okay, maybe you're not a teacher professor. Go lead confirmation class, right?
Yeah.
Boy, you'll get all sorts of challenges and in the trenches basic training experience there real fast. So there you go. Finish. Yeah. Leave them with that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I wish he would do some debating. So next time you talk to him, put a bug in his ear, ask him to do a debate. I'd love to see him in the forum.
I definitely will, Gary. Thanks as always for having me on. It's always a blast.